Well, Kansas City went to voters in 2010 to renew a public safety tax to fund a new $40 million state-of-the-art crime laboratory. Now, 3 years on, huge cost overruns have ballooned the price tag for the project to almost twice that. And even though they're now spending $74 million, city officials acknowledge they're going to have to dramatically scale back the scope and size of the lab. The $74 million question is, how could officials have got this so wrong?
Because they always get it wrong. I mean, I'm not being too exaggerated. The cost overruns for public projects are just, it's hard to imagine a major, or remember a major project, Nick, in which cost was not exceeded. Now, what they often do in Kansas City and what they're doing with the
And is that true all across the metro?
Well, of course, Kansas City is more involved in major projects than other communities, like Bartle Hall, for example, or the Power and Light District, both of which went over budget. What they often do in Kansas City, and what they're trying to do on the crime lab, is squeeze down the amenities, downsize the facility, and then claim it came in under budgets. We spent exactly what we were supposed to, yeah, and it's half what it was supposed to be. So there's always, I mean, this is a very, very, Nick, familiar story in our community.
But does this break faith, though, with what the voters approved in 2010?
Nick, I think what voters were not told when they approved this $57 million project was that $57 million was an estimate, and a very rough estimate based on the square footage. It didn't factor in a lot of money for land or design, and then only later did they pick the site, which admittedly was a very difficult site. It was 4 square blocks. It involved acquiring numerous parcels and houses and relocating people, and they decided to treat those, they wanted to treat those people fairly, so they paid them more than the market value of their homes. The land cost was way more than was anticipated. And I think at least voters should have been told, folks, this is an estimate.
Yeah,
we think this is what it might cost.
They?
And they don't build in much contingency. You'd think that after this happened repeatedly, you would have an estimate, and you would also say we need to build in a 25% contingency to account not only for additional land and design, but inflation and other unforeseen costs.
But it is a good thing that the folks who were being displaced as a result of this project were being treated fairly, though, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. But a lot of that money for that land acquisition and relocation of people came from HUD. That wasn't city funding. I think Jermaine got $1 million or something from
That's
HUD.
City Councilman Jermaine Reed.
Jermaine
Some
Reed
of it was federal funding, but that builds in federal rules, which are more costly to comply with.
But what you have is, in 2008, when this thing was designed, you had steel at one cost, nuts and bolts at another cost. Then you come back 5 years later, the price of those items have gone up, so your cost automatically goes up. So I think one of the things that they did wrong was the projection of the cost and how long it took to get voters to approve it and get it to the table for voters to approve. That was one of the things that they didn't take into consideration. One of the board members on the police board is insisting on 70,000 square foot for the crime lab when they want to cut it down to 60,000 because they really don't need the other space because they don't have people to work in that space.
Stacy.
Here's the real problem, things called soft costs. Purchasing land, the design build out, and things like furniture. An assistant city manager, Pat Klein, even said as much that we should have gotten into these details much deeper, and we could have in 2011, but we didn't. And then Mayor Sly James comes out, and Lynn had the money quote of the week saying, I'm not going to second guess what people should have done. Well then, who will? If it's not the city manager or it's not Mayor Sly James, who is going to second guess why people didn't do more detail into these soft costs, which are really going to cost the overruns? It's not necessarily inflation. These soft costs are going to be in the tens of the millions of dollars. And so you want to know why people don't have confidence in things like rebuilding the airport or having light rail in the city? It's because of projects like the crime lab.
That's a very good point. Now the question is, what do you do? Because the city says, well, we've got a plan and we will build a very good lab. The police department wants the bigger lab, even though it's not known how they'll staff that lab. It's supposed to be something they can use for 30 to 40 years. So they still want their state-of-the-art crime lab, and this is setting up a big fight between the police department or the police board and city officials.
And what, as consumers, as individual citizens of the city, are we going to be less well served as a result of this?
Well, you may end up spending more money. I mean, they're talking about issuing additional bonds. Now, they say the sales tax that was passed for the lab will be able to sort of justify those extra bonds, and so we'll see when they refinance it. But I mean, that's real money. I mean, we're talking tens of millions of dollars that someone is going to have to come up with. You either have a lesser lab, or taxpayers have to pay more for this facility.
Well, Councilman Sharp is sounding the alarm that we may not have the facility that we need to catch up with the backlog of evidence as a result of these cutbacks that are going to come.